Thank you, ASCI, for first of all, organizing this summit. When you said trust, it has a lot of facets to that in a different context, right? So today we will discuss, of course, in one particular context. Just want to admit that I'm the last minute moderator. So the panel is much more prepared than me. So just one disclaimer as a lawyer. Very, very interesting topic and very close to my heart, dark patterns. There is a reason why I say close to my heart, because in fact, I was involved in the Consumer Affairs Ministry dark pattern guidelines that came out, and my colleague who's sitting here somewhere, they pulled out so many dark patterns, from their experiences that if you see the current dark pattern guidelines, it actually has a list or examples, which of course, Manisha's team had worked sort of ASCI, just, as a pointer, if you all of us have noticed, ASCI is the first one to point out the issues, and then, probably the regulations follow in this case as well. Just want to connect few dots from the earlier panels or conversations that we have so that, we are all able to contribute in a meaningful way. So if you see what Mr. Jaju said, 60% is digital, right? When you say digital, there is a lot of money being spent on that. And when the money is being spent, there is an expectation of ROI. And with the personalization point that was made, right? More expectation of how much hyper personalization can happen. Then when you talk about, like a sort of machine gun approach where you send the same message across all the platforms in a same way to all the consumers versus when you have personalization, especially now we are talking about, I think one of the topics came up is hyper-local. When you go hyper-local, again, region-wise messaging may be different. There are so many nuances of it if you really start thinking about it, especially in the Indian context, because people may understand the same thing in a different sense. So how do you communicate in the language and the message the way they understand, right? So I think there are a lot of, when you talk about digital communication, there are all these elements that one has to keep in mind. And in that context, when now AI, which as a technology enabler that has come in, which obviously, all your teams must be very excited and, working, with, rather playing with AI at this stage. So in that context, when you are going at a, super specialization level, super personalization, so how do you ensure that, as the word was used, that it is consumer education, consumer information through the advertisement versus consumer manipulation. And here it is not only the content, but the practices, the UI, UX on the digital platform. So I think this question is to all of you. How do you ensure? Let's first discuss what are the basic principles that everybody in the ecosystem has to keep in mind while developing these principles, because as a lawyer, I'm going to tell you here that law is not going to answer any of these questions. So as responsible brand developers, content developers, your thoughts?
I think you're right. The burden of responsibility in this scenario lies with people like us who are working with brands. I think a word that's often used in the broader advertising industry or the communications industry is persuasion, right? And persuasion is an interesting term because persuasion can be done positively, it can be done negatively. So I think the general principle that we try to apply when we are designing experiences, communication, whatever it might be, the general principle that we try to apply is, are we nudging the customer in the sense of guiding them, or are we nudging the customer in the sense of manipulating them, right? And what we want to definitely avoid is manipulation. So if I have to give you a concrete example, right? If someone is coming to your platform, and the reason this is so important, right? There's often an argument that in the offline world, even with posters and everything, some dark patterns were always there. But the risk when you go digital is that scales infinitely, right? Because A, there's a data advantage. The platform perhaps knows your behavior better than you know your own behavior. B, there's an AI advantage now where it can be acted upon in many different ways and at a certain speed where you can't even stop and think and make the decision. So those points of consideration are very important, right? So for example, if for some reason your system knows that, it is this person's, mother's death anniversary, right? And prompts something for them to therefore buy something. That's a very dark pattern, which should not be done. right? And therefore, when we're designing these systems, we have to have a clear understanding of what are the no-go areas, and what are the vulnerable cohorts that we should not be targeting at all, right? And that policy will not help. That code will help, right? You have to code it, hard code it into the system that we will not do these things. So I think the whole territory is about when our job is persuasion, but persuasion has to be positive. It has to be guidance. It should not at any time become coercion. That's the principle of design.
Thank you. And you use certain words, design, etc. So we are going to deep dive into those elements. Over to you.
Yeah, so thank you again, ASCI, for this invitation. I think it's a great opportunity to be part of community, which I usually do not interact as much. So thank you for that. And just by way of introduction, FEES, we are industry body for fintechs, and we're also RBI recognized SRO. So we carry the responsibility of many things fintech, including advertising and selling. Just to give a scale of, the network that we have is 90% of the payment or small ticket loans run through our members, including data flows which happen through account aggregator, KYC that you do. So, this is very, very powerful network that we have. And just like everybody else, we also grapple with this problem of dark pattern. The way we think about it, I think some old good principles always are handy when you think about something as complex and as evolving and nebulous as dark pattern, which is changing very fast. So responsibility lies at the heart of it. And when you say responsibility, I think, in the customer protection, we normally say these are the 5 principles that, something has to be fair, it has to be transparent, they have to be suitable and appropriateness kind of thing. And then you talk about, if things go wrong, there is a grievance mechanism and so on. So I think if we keep those principles in sort of our line of sight and continue to ask these questions that, okay, this is what I'm doing and how does it impacts those principles that we are talking about, it is always handy. Second thing is, I guess, the old lens of, competition and market forces is perhaps not enough. We have seen that market on their own cannot self-correct on something like this, because if you see the fintech space or the e-commerce space, very, very competitive, and when the race is about the fastest finger, then obviously this becomes very embedded. And I sometimes feel that even within our community, I'll be very honest, when people talk about it, there is sort of naivety and innocence about, okay, because we are trying to make the whole experience very seamless, and that is why we are doing it. But the dark pattern is very embedded in some ways. For financial services, particularly very challenging, because nobody thinks about buying an insurance in the morning, right? It's a lot of these products are push products. And therefore, and then we all know that, there's a general sort of thinking that financial services are good for people, right? If people have more financial products and services, they have better health, they have better resilience, and so on. So in some sense, as a country, as a society, we want people to take more financial product. There's no doubt about it. But I think the means is becoming a little challenging as a community, that when we are, driving these products, are we crossing that boundary where we are not letting consumer decide? And in fact, dark pattern is something so deep in terms of impact that it sort of dilutes all you think, right? If you think about consent, if dark pattern is there, my consent is itself compromise. Correct. So it's a very sort of deeply undercuts a lot of things, and therefore it's important to tackle it in a different way.
I think, since you brought up insurance, when we were in fact doing the dark pattern guidelines, one of the things, if you see in some of the travel portals, etc., insurance. And when I untick it, you don't want to be safe or something like that, right? So how do you, the UI, UX, how do you manipulate, as he used the word, right? I think some of these elements, they become the industry norm in a sense, right? And then to sort of convince everybody that this is not the right norm in the first place, right? And then to change it. Sometimes things happen, and then you have to undo them, right? So I think at least understanding what is right versus wrong, when there are no legal principles, I think that is where the ethical principles probably prevail, right? So, yeah, sorry. Just thought I'll just bring that out because,
So why I said I'll go last, because you said that lawyers cannot control everything, and that's why I said we'll go last. I think I'll start with, let's take a step back and we lawyers go to basics.
Yeah.
So what is the basic? When we say dark pattern, I think let's interpret pattern more. What is pattern? Pattern is action at scale. So a single action, will it fall under dark pattern or not? I think debatable. But when action becomes scale, that we call pattern. So just to give an example again, this insurance bit. If it happens with all customers, it's a pattern. And it's a dark pattern because it harms them, and that's why we are talking dark pattern. It all boils down to what is action again. As a lawyer, let's interpret that again. What is action? Action means you intend to do something. In criminal law, there is a concept of mens rea. This is sort of civil side, I'll say intent. So it all boils down to what is the intent of the designer or the instructor who is giving instruction to the designer that this is how you design it. So it all starts with somebody who is thinking about what to instruct, what action should be taken, and that action should be at scale. And that's how this entire dark pattern starts. So I think when I see it from legal point of view, it's the intent that's the basic concept of dark pattern. That's where all it starts. Am I here to trap people, or am I here to facilitate them, or am I here to give them more choices, or am I here to nudge them, or am I here to trap them to buy something, to do something, to give up something, to not give up something, etc. So I'll go by intent first, and that's where I think we need fixing. We don't need fixing in what is the outcome. UI, UX is the outcome. I think we need fixing at the end of people who start it. And that's where I'll go first.
So no, absolutely, because as was said in the earlier panels, right, it has to be shared understanding of that trust, because and that has to be across, because I'm going to come to you once again, Vivek, because as a brand, right, you have control over your communication or probably your own website or otherwise. Your brand is being sold across in a distribution chain across, where you may or may not have the control, right? Your brand being sold, for example, on third-party e-commerce platforms, which may be engaging into dark patterns. So how are you, sort of, one is your control over UI, UX versus also managing at the broader level. How do your teams work on that part?
So again, I'll go back to intent and then I will explain.
Yeah.
So intent is that we co-launch this course with ASCI on dark pattern. That's our intent. That's our organization intent, that we want to educate people that, don't get into dark pattern. When you identify, you have to take certain actions. So as an organization, we have an intent to fix this. What we are doing in the background is, first of all, this is the step. Me being here talking on this topic is one of the steps from the organization. What we are also doing is we are also liaising, or we are also meeting, or we are also educating entire supply chain wherever this happens. We are also meeting, platforms. We are also trying to educate them. We are also meeting ministries. We are, by the way, doing a lot of things internally. We are trying to develop a tool which actually identifies dark patterns in websites. We are now testing it internally, and that whether that tool works or not. So the concept of tool is, it's a plugin. You run it through a website. As per dark pattern guidelines, it will pick up certain patterns which can be a trap for consumers, and then you fix it. Because what also happens is, sometimes the instructions which you pass on to the design team, they are so in the habit of doing the same thing again and again that you would not know that some algorithm somewhere will lead you to dark pattern. So we are doing that. We are also engaging with all the platforms. As I say, we are educating them that in relation to at least us, don't do it. By the way, it's also to go with creating a level playing field, right? That's also there, and that's why we are engaging it so much. We as ethical company don't engage into it. But if we don't educate people, if we don't talk to people, liaise with them, educate them, then we are not creating level playing field for ourselves. And that's one thing which we have in mind. that how to fix this ecosystem so that level playing field is created for us.
No, very good to know that, that all the efforts that, and those of you who are not aware, please do visit ASCI's website. They do have an excellent course. In fact, the Consumer Affairs Ministry in between also had suggested that you do internal audits. I believe your team can assist with guidance on that as well, or because... Yeah, I mean, if you take the course, probably you will get that. Coming to you, as you rightly said, BFSI sector, and now that you are a self-regulatory body, financial products, if you really see traditionally and what we see now, when you go on a particular, say, platform, there are so many sort of suggestions, do this, do that, even take loans. You get calls also, this loan is available, etc. In between, completely digressing from the point, but you also had some Chinese apps, lending, which were then banned and all of that. So you have seen so many things. And plus RBI, of course, as a watchdog, has been doing a good job. And that's why your organization has been set up. So in all this context, how do you ensure that trust by design? I mean, what are the basic, especially for financial products, from a consumer awareness perspective, because you understand it's a biscuit or whatever, but to understand a financial products and financial implications of that, it's not that easy at times. So how do you ensure, that element through your organization?
Yeah, so if you look at financial services, I think, especially from a fintech perspective, for whom non-face-to-face and data becomes very important. So I guess a lot of push has come from regulator. So data access is very highly controlled, and more controls are coming along with DPDPA to ensure that data is only what you need and it's not used for other purposes, because that is the starting point when my data or a consumer's data is used to manipulate and going beyond for which you have taken. So I think that is a very critical design concept which is getting embedded, that you justify what you are taking and you have more and more high disclosure in a very seamless way. And in next 1 year, when we see DPDP implementation, you will see much more, clarity on that thing. Second thing, which I think as a I think industry we have seen is disclosure being very important. I know there's a lot of literature which says that disclosures are not enough and information is not enough, and this whole concept of common consumer and so on. But given the sheer volume and the velocity of the things which are happening, I think this is a very important piece in general. It might take initially some time, but without customer being involved in seeing what is right, what is wrong, and having that critical thinking for comparison and so on, it won't work. So there is a lot of effort which has gone in terms of standardizing disclosure so that, customer in a very consistent way can do the comparison and see what is right for them and understand the overall cost. There's a lot of effort of unbundling things. So, for example, initially, this whole thing that, by default, there would be click on, which is absolutely not acceptable. And as an industry and as a regulator, this is something which has been very closely observed that this should not happen. Obviously, by 90% of the industry at some point was by default click. Now it is reverse, which of course is a shift from the regulator or the push from the regulator which has happened. And I think there is a evidence now building up globally and also in India that in the short term these things do work. Obviously there's a lot of data which shows that dark pattern actually leads to better revenue and so on. So one cannot divide. And I understand from a business perspective when your success metrics is growth and consumer and things, this is very natural part of your DNA to think in that direction. But for a brand which is looking at long-term relationships, especially financial services, which is ultimately customer coming to you back, more and more, you want to diversify the product offering and so on. It's not so transactional. You can't really, run this business on a very short, side basis. There is evidence building up that, people actually get very annoyed with a lot of these dark patterns. They do observe them. And actually at an ecosystem level, it actually disengages the customer if you do a lot of these things because they don't even want to interact with you. So I think we as a as a community, we want to bring those, education to the table, those conversation to the table. And I guess we have to attack this problem across level, at ecosystem level. Regulation can do as much, bodies like us can do much, but there's a whole system of UI UX designer, the companies which themselves are actually doing it. So nothing is accidental about it. It's a very, very thought through process, and therefore one has to be very deliberate about dealing with them.
So since you mentioned this point, right, and you also mentioned some things are deliberate. So at an organizational level, when you are looking at it, who should be in the room to discuss this? It's not only, the legal teams or the compliance teams or the marketing teams. At the designer level, how do you sort of, ensure that communication through the organization in the same sense?
I wish every consumer should have a chief customer officer. We have chief compliance officer, chief whatever, right?
Absolutely.
Somebody who can think from that lens and who has perhaps a very different kind of reporting. We have seen this work in a way in regulatory sector where now, for example, CCOs have to report directly to the board.
Yes.
And they're very independent. They have to have a certain level of experience and so on, just to ensure that this position has a spine to, do things in a certain way. I guess that is something which
I think that's a great point, because ultimately each stakeholder has to have a say, and who represents a consumer is the officer who is independent. I think that's something we worth considering. Amaresh, over to you. You spoke about design and this concept, privacy by design, then trust by design, etc. These are the sort of sometimes they become cliche words, but I think what is the real meaning when you say, building that trust through design? What thought process goes behind? Are there some surveys behind figuring out how to build trust in terms of consumer feedback or otherwise? What is a method of achieving the best case scenarios? Yeah.
So I'll go back to the point that Dr. Vivek made, right? Eventually, it starts with intent, right? And the thing is, if you set a ship sailing, and it's even 2 degrees off, which will reach a different country eventually, right? So what you decide upfront is very important. And in the world of technology, there's always been this concept of white hat and dark hat or black hat. So there's white hat SEO, there's dark hat SEO. So it's always been known that technology is a tool. It can be deployed by good actors and bad actors. So first, see, as people who partner with brands, first of all, there is a limit to what we can control, right? So the first choice is, are you choosing to be a good actor as an organization? Now, if you choose to be a good actor as an organization, that also reflects in the kind of clientele that you take on, right? So if we feel that, there are some fly-by-night operators who are expecting things from us that are not right by the, guidelines of what needs to be done for a consumer, then those are not the clients that we partner with to begin with. So that itself is a big pressure of us, because otherwise, if you're blindly taking on every client that you can, and some of them are bad actors themselves, then that will flow through into the design process that you take on. Then coming to the design itself, right? I think what we realize now is, with the level of personalization possible, we're no longer just designing journeys. We're actually designing different realities for different people. And that's a big responsibility, because each person is essentially having an experience of seeing things based entirely on their past behaviors, data, and so on and so forth. So how do you then encode the system to not use dark patterns, or not use, very sensitive data, to not to identify which are the vulnerable cohorts, like I was, talking about earlier, and how do you make sure that the experience is positive? So one of the ways to measure this is, I think, human beings react to their KPIs and their metrics, right? So if we are only setting, conversion KPIs, then what tends to happen is it's an arms race to the bottom, right? Because eventually, like Sugandh was saying earlier, there are studies which show that certain dark patterns do yield better results, but that's in the short term. So therefore, our focus is, we should measure positive customer experience rather than just, conversion as a metric. It may happen in campaign, but at large, when you're tracking your consumer, if you're measuring for positive customer experience, what starts to happen is you're balancing your need to get them to take an action vis-a-vis what is right by the audience itself, right? So that whole notion of let's design for positive customer experience and be a good actor is, I think, what holds us in good stead.
So I'm just going to pause and take a poll here based on what you said. How many of you want to have personalized ads? Okay. Not too many. Okay. So this understanding that, this was a conversation I was having a couple of days back. Somebody said that I actually enjoy personalized ads because they are relevant for me. But at least in this audience, too many hands did not go up, or maybe I hope everybody's awake and they thought about it. So I think in that context, right, and the consumer choices may keep varying in terms of what they expect. To the point you made, right, because what this may be visualized dark pattern. It is not currently, just to be clear, but so working on somebody's behavior, right, and delivering something for that individual choice, it is such a gray area, right? And now, Vivek, coming to you, when algorithms now with the AI, now let's look at how things are developing, where the AI itself probably may start deciding how the engines should work, right? So when you're designing, your teams are designing the products, or your teams are designing the outreach, in a different way. How do you ensure that the machine doesn't go overboard?
So by the way, AI is going overboard anyways. I don't know how much we are able to help. But just to comment on your earlier point, I would want personalized ads only if they are not biased. The issue with personalized ads are they are so biased for the seller and not for me that I don't like them. So just to give an example, I booked ticket for Tokyo very recently, and on various websites, because of cookies, it started flashing me best hotel in Tokyo, and all hotels were different, by the way. So I think the issue is again going back to the intent, whether you're creating good consumer experience. For me, good consumer experience could have been that it's really showing me good places. It's really showing me that these are the places you can do, and hence these few hotels you can choose, etc., etc. And then probably I would have gone to that site and booked. I'm just saying. So I agree with Amaresh is that good personal experience is more important than this. Similarly, when we are deploying AI nowadays, I'm sure that a lot of people would have heard that Air Canada case. It was a small case actually. So what happened was that in 2024 last, there was a consumer who was actually chatting with chatbot of Air Canada, and the chatbot was AI-enabled chatbot, and it actually gave some information to the consumer which was not correct. When consumer filed the case, company said, "Oh, it was AI chatbot, and I don't control AI, so I should not be responsible." The court decision was that since AI is controlled by you, and the algorithm and decision making is fed by you, and hence you are equally responsible, and AI is not, because it's your AI. So I think going by that theme, irrespective of whether you do AI or not AI, ultimately you are responsible. So few things which you need to sort of see when you're dealing with AI. So whether whatever chatbot you put, or whether algorithm you put, whether it's compromising with the customer autonomy, whether it's compromising with transparency, whether it's compromising with choice, and few other things like that. So basically, I think whenever you design anything, if you set your principles right, and then you say that if designing is compromising with these things, and hence I will not design it that way. That's the first step. I also keep thinking that why these dark patterns are emerging and so prevalent that we all have used it, by the way. And I'm a very careful consumer. Very recently, a website actually baited me, and I had, instead of 1 month, I took subscription of 12 months. And when I reached out to them and I asked them, they said, sorry, no refunds. So I kept thinking that what's the enforcement? I don't think, by the way, that enforcement will be possible because it's so prevalent that I think what we need to do is we need to self-regulate, where ASCI comes in, good self-regulation body, and we as responsible organizations and people sitting here need to take action. We don't engage with people who actually indulge into these activities. So self-regulation is first thing we should do with the principles in mind that whatever you do in terms of instruction should not be commercially driven. When you give instructions to your designers, they should be experience driven. And are you meeting few consumer principles and the outcome matches those principles or not? So if you map it that way, then probably it will be far better. I know all of these things are commercial, so I am sure that some way we'll have to map commercials as well. I'm not debating that at all. But everything cannot be driven by commercials. It has to be experience, it has to be ethics, it has to be trust, so that consumer keeps coming back to you.
So, when we were actually sort of drafting the dark pattern guidelines and, the examples, etc., all of us realized that these things will keep evolving. If you shut one, the other will emerge, right? So, in terms of, and plus with the technology, things, will keep evolving. So, do you believe that this regular audit, regular conversations has like, how often, so suppose you have to guide your team that you are supposed to conduct audit, how often would you conduct that audit?
In my view, it should be concurrent audit.
Concurrent, yeah.
Of course, means I don't know whether we'll reach there or not. It's very difficult. But if audit is being done by a chatbot, then it can be concurrent audit, right? If any new design is leading to dark pattern.
Yes.
If it is self-audit, means audit by a human being like you and me, then probably, once a quarter or once half. Because we need to also see that how many consumers we are addressing during this period.
Right.
And how can you put that thing unleashed for that longer time? I think those could be the parameters, but it is technology-led, which is very much possible in this AI age, then it should be concurrent audit.
Right. Over to you now. Since you mentioned self-regulation and you are a self-regulatory body, could you just explain now, RBI being the regulator for the sector, having strict norms, they come up with their own guidelines, and you as a self-regulatory body, how often are those conversations? And suppose you were to sort of regulate on these lines, how will that, is it what is a better way? Co-regulation, only self-regulation, oversight, etc.?
So I genuinely believe that we can't put everything on the government and regulator. I think we are not children, just needing that. This is very bad outcome for a country also, right? Why we want everything to be done through such strong regulation. So regulation, I think, is broadly clear with dark patterns coming in. I think there's a general understanding. There's enough, though it's a very new concept, but within 5 years globally, I think there's understanding about it. So there's not much to invent in that sense. I think the way we see our role is really bringing the community together in terms of common understanding of the dark pattern. As I said, since it is new, because you are used to doing things in a certain way, you actually, they become part of your muscle memory. You don't even think that, I'm doing something wrong. So that is where, bringing industry together and, giving them this information, knowledge, we do something called, we ask our members to report about others. So if maybe they are good, but it is their responsibility to ensure that others are also doing. We use something very closely is, social media monitoring and app stores monitoring, where people do talk about, these cheating or deceitful behavior that, I did not apply for this, but this happened. These, so-called, whatever patterns you talk about. So we do, that customer do give this signal, and it is on us that pick, even few signals are, just tip of the iceberg. And if you do that and then you scratch and then you find much more problem. So as a body, we feel for us, those signals are extremely important in our work. And we are not making rules cannot be forever, right? Because things are changing. So, generally there's a saying that, responsibility is a law of the tomorrow, right? You can't, forcibly think of all the situation. And therefore, the governance of these institutions become very important. So how do we engage with their leadership? How do the boards are looking at some of these elements and asking right question? again is very important part of toolkit when you think about, dealing with this problem in a very comprehensive way, and not leaving it to some individuals, because this designer is last leg in the whole value chain, actually.
Exactly, right? So coming on this, on the trust by design discussions that we have been talking about, any examples where some of the platforms have, implemented this very well, and what are the methods by which it was done?
So, more than platforms, I think trust by design starts at an organization level. And I think lighthouse brand in this has been Apple. I think Apple has been, when you create so much trust, so for example, the whole, privacy bit, Apple has been able to position itself and, monetize the fact that they are trusted. Monetize the fact that in this world that we're talking about, where people are so scared that they'll get scammed and so on, here's a brand that I can, relax and operate with. And of course, then if you look at their platforms and the ecosystem that Apple has, it's not just a product, right? It's also a service in many ways. You'll see that there are times when they've actually compromised on usability because they are prioritizing the safety of the transaction, right? So I think that's definitely a brand that we can learn from. And I think also, I can't think of which brands have done this, but I think simple things like, not weaponizing transparency, right? So for example, every platform that we go to, we get terms of service that is massive. Now, none of us know what we are signing up for. But if there was a brand out there that could, maybe create a simple concept card version of it, if someone truly wanted to absorb that, terms of service, almost like a nutrition label for websites. Those are the kind of thought processes that we need to start bringing in, saying, are we just being compliant, or are we actually trying to make build trust with the end customer?
No, excellent points. And, this is out of syllabus question. So since you mentioned about, all of you mentioned about the consumer disclosure, communication, etc., in the Indian context, considering, the literacy level, the understanding level, the language, nuances, what are the very good methods of, consumer education? Because one thing is, when you say dark patterns, the consumer, especially now in this world where is going to become so super specialized that I may be targeted, or I may be, receiving certain dark patterns which are personalized to me, which are very difficult to detect, through through any mechanisms, right? So how do you even educate consumer? What are the various methods, if you have any at the top of your mind?
It's a very difficult bit, this is exactly the problem, because very new customers are coming, and we all know, especially for a segment that we cater to, which is low and mid income, it's very hard to expect customer to know these nuances. So that is why the onus does lie on a lot at this point, particularly because the asymmetry between the supplier and the buyer is so high. But, some of the things which we feel is, being cheated is a very bad feeling, right? So you might, still do it, but then the customer doesn't come back, and they, do talk about it. And now, especially young customer, they are making those noises, which I think is a very good sort of way to it. Customer education, I think, again, I wouldn't say customer education in a sense, a very narrow way, but I think in general, it's important for our education system to prepare consumer for the digital world, which we are not, I guess. We're still very old style curriculum, but more horizontal sort of skill set to people in terms of critical thinking, questioning what you are seeing, cross verifying, those kind of things which you normally think are important, which I guess in our education system somehow do not get, those, we don't train our children to question everything, is going to be very important in this.
So at the school level, this can start actually, some of these elements.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm questioning the question.
Okay.
Okay, I'll ask you a question now. So if you go to a departmental store and there are a lot of apples, apple cart, do you expect yourself to be educated, so which apple is good, or do you expect department store to put all the good apples there? I think expectation is that department store should put all the good apples there, so that you don't have to see 100 apples and then pick one good. I think that's where I am. I think responsibility lies on this side rather than that side, because it's very difficult to understand that each consumer will be able to identify dark pattern.
Yeah.
Responsibility of this side, people who are far more evolved
Yes.
in terms of designing, in terms of intent, in terms of instruction, in terms of technology, in terms of commercials. Hence, I would say that will come later. This will come prior.
Yeah.
The only challenge with that problem is that you're making consumer very numb and in a sense, and also giving them completely divide of this risk because they would always be bad actor. This is a very ideal situation.
That's the point, right?
Appreciate.
Because unfortunately, there will be one bad apple there.
Appreciate. But I'm not suggesting that we should not do latter. But I think before that, this side needs to be fixed for you.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that is a given, right? But there will be bad apples and therefore, sort of, and I completely understand, in school we read that, buyers beware principles and all that. But I think the reason we are talking about, the challenges in the digital world is just the sheer complexity of it.
Yeah, no, so I actually agree with Dr. Vivek when he mentioned that you can't really shift this burden to the customer. But that's like we said, right, for good actors. So obviously Unilever is not out to scam its customers, but there'll be some fly-by-night operator out there who may. So I look at this as air cover versus ground mobilization. So ground mobilization, heavy-duty stuff has to happen at the end of the brands and making sure the design principles are right. But for new, so over time, people are also smart. They start understanding that there are broad stroke scams out there. So if I were to take the example of all the work that HDFC Bank has done in the recent past, creating awareness of deepfake scams, right? So that's just raising awareness in the consumer that there's a new type of scam out there. So you be alert. Now, that is to protect against bad actors. So I think as far as the regulated industry is concerned, we're all trying our best to, make sure we have no dark patterns. But there is some level of consumer education required to protect them from bad actors.
No, absolutely. Because, even the ads that we have seen like RBI's, not sharing OTP or this digital arrest and things like that, right? I think those are really useful messages, even through, I would say, I have seen some of the Marathi serials through which the, education about this digital arrest was given, which was very innovative way of communication. I think if you were to, and before the audience question, last question, though I think most of you have answered that questions, but as a takeaway, what are those couple of 2-3 basic inherent principles, just to summarize, that everybody in the ecosystem, whether it be brands, whether it be platforms, whether it be designers, AI platforms, have to keep in mind while, designing for trust?
See, I think I'll go back to the beginning, and I'd love the point about intent that Dr. Vivek made. I think we need to keep in mind that AI doesn't just scale intelligence, it scales intent. So one is defining the intent clearly, and then I think backing it up with positive customer experience. And the way we think about it when it comes to personalization is there a consumer value exchange?
Yes.
The consumer value exchange is a guiding principle for us. So, the example that he gave about a site giving random ads, that's just irritating, right? There's no value exchange there. So if I'm sharing my personal data with you, are you giving me value back for that?
Right.
So that's something that we keep in mind while designing.
I think just maybe at a high level, thinking consumer is your own. Ultimately, they are trusting you. They are coming to you. Spend, marketing dollars to get them, and why you want to, irritate them. So, and taking responsibility that your action, especially in the financial services, can have much adverse impact. And just keep that in back of your mind and front of your mind, maybe, to say that, okay, I should not do something which can harm is, good thumb rule to follow.
I'll go back to the first response only, intent.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be fixed, along with 4 or 5 consumer principles that should not be compromised.
I think sometimes simple messages, across the board are easier to capture than complicated statements, right? I mean, that I think intent is very simple to understand and digest. Yeah. Audience, would love to have your questions. Yes.
My question is for Dr. Vivek Mittal. I've been in levers, and back in the days when I was a brand manager, see, I'm a baby boomer generation. You look like a millennial. So back in the days, it was very simple. All that you did was legal technical clearance before you cleared a script. And, once it was cleared, you went and shot it, and it was done. But the challenges have gone manifold, millionfold. I saw one ad, I think it was a part of Saheli's presentation somewhere on Axe. That's your brand? And it didn't meet the compliance standard. Yeah? Am I correct, Saheli? How did it go through your system? Because by the way, I have tremendous respect for Levers as an ethical company. Yeah? But how did it go through your system and failed the ASCI test?
So first of all, I have not seen that ad. I'll not be able to comment. I can tell you that we have a very robust system of clearing any consumer communication. And sometimes, the way you perceive or consumer perceive versus we perceive could be different. And wherever, and I'm not suggesting this particular, I'm not talking about this particular ad, but if we realize that yes, there has been some instances which don't go well, we take back our decision. It's not that we have not. So all I'm suggesting is that our process is very robust, process is with good intent, and that's what we stand for as a company. I can certainly say that probably 99.99% our communication could be fully compliant. There could be few here and there, which probably is a question of perception rather than intent. And if the question of perception, we are willing to take it forward and correct it. Why not?
Thank you.
Ethical standards.
Ethical,
right?
yeah.
The committee which approves everything is not only lawyers. It's a cross-functional team.
Amaresh, you spoke about positive customer experience, and also we are talking about trust by design. While we all know these dark patterns and all are all short-term temptations that the organization has, but then what is the way to measure a positive customer experience? What are the matrices, hardcore matrices that you can actually put to use to say that, yes, this has built the trust, or this design has built the trust, or this is a positive customer experience? While we can talk about NPS and a lot of other metrics, but what is that the organization should put in practice? So that is one. Maybe both of you can answer together. Second, to Sugandh, now you being part of the fintech kind of a regulator, and that's the area where a lot of such dark patterns may emerge. And dark patterns may not only emerge in terms of tricking the customer into paying more. Sometimes the dark patterns may emerge in tricking the customer, showing the lowest price product, which may not be good for the customer, specifically in case of insurance. A lot of these aggregators show you the lowest price policies, which may not offer you the full value of the policy. Now, as a regulator, can you put some kind of a trust certificate or certified a positive reinforcement saying that this particular site or this particular process meets certain requirements and this is a certified, which is more of a positive thing rather than penalizing a company?
The short answer I would say is we have multiple metrics right from a brand level where you can add certain, certain queries which are around trust in your brand surveys, etc., to down to in-platform level. So if you're running a campaign, your brand lift surveys will give you an indicator, down to a platform level where depending on the number of returns and stuff, you have patterns that you can detect saying, am I making people buy stuff that they didn't really want and therefore they're returning it? So it's a bit of a science. We work with our data science teams to work on that. But short answer is it has to go from brand to the communication to the platform.
I think it's hard at this point to say, put a stamp of approval on something like this, which has too many variables. So I think we might not want to go in that direction. But I think what we are certainly looking at, what ASCI does, is some sort of audit in these companies to say that how they are looking at dark patterns and what are they doing to address them is what I will say.
Thank you. Thank you, ASCI, for giving this opportunity. And thanks for the very interesting conversation. Look forward to the continued effort to curb dark patterns. Thank you.